A lot of things are happening fast in DC, and there are some directives and decisions that could harm the Bay directly. So we're watchdogging the administration and identifying the important stuff to gear up to defend the Bay. Based on our long-term legal and scientific experience, I know we're ready. Right now, we're keeping an eye on three main threats that could directly impact the Bay. First, the new administration has decided to interfere with California water policy. That poses a direct threat to the Bay's freshwater flows and fish. Second, the new administration is pushing to reduce regulation on polluting industry and to expand fossil fuel production. This is going to impact communities around the Bay. And third, the new administration is denying climate change and deleting data and programs. This is likely to increase the risk of climate impacts on the Bay and on future generations. Currently, less than half of the water in the Bay's upstream rivers makes it to the Bay because of water diversions and dams. Too much water is taken out of the rivers for unsustainable agribusiness and large cities, including those that are outside of the Bay's watershed. This means that there's already not enough water in our rivers. And let me be clear, that's not because of a 3-inch fish. The health of the fish is just a key indicator of the health of the whole watershed. This includes local communities, tribal groups, businesses, commercial fishing operations, and even farms. We all depend on clean water. Yet some of the new executive orders are aimed at diverting more water out of the Bay Delta watershed. They're also trying to waive environmental laws like the Endangered Species Act to make water diversions easier. And then the Trump administration ordered the Army Corps of Engineers to release water from 2 federally operated dams last month. Then they had to suddenly stop because the releases came without warning and posed dangerous threats of flooding to downstream communities and to farms. Ironically, this actually wasted water that was being held in reservoirs for farms to use in the coming dry season. These directives were made under the guise of helping the LA fires. But this water couldn't actually help LA because A, there wasn't a water shortage in LA at the time, and B, it wasn't physically possible for this water that was 300 miles away to even reach LA. News reports later disclosed that the administration actually intended for this water to go to wealthy megafarm donors in the Central Valley. And you might be wondering, where was Governor Newsom? Unfortunately, he decided to issue his own executive order to increase water diversions and waive environmental laws for some of those same wealthy megafarm donors. If these increased diversions actually go through, it's likely to worsen drought conditions in the Delta and in the upstream rivers. The lack of fresh water will also increase salinity in the Delta, which will drastically change the habitat for the wildlife and hurt local farmers and communities. So what is Baykeeper doing about this? Everything. Baykeeper and our partners are on the front lines protecting the watershed. At this point, our coalition is literally one of the only things standing between the Bay Delta's rivers and the bad water decisions being made by President Trump and Governor Newsom. So can anyone guess what river this is in this photo that's running dry? It's one of the largest rivers in the state. And if you're guessing the San Joaquin River, you're right. Our drones caught this mighty river running dry just a few years ago. These kinds of drastic river conditions are why Baykeeper is currently involved in 3 actions to challenge existing water diversion projects and plans. First, we're in court challenging the state water project's operations for CEQA and California Endangered Species Act violations. Second, our science director is serving as one of the experts in key litigation challenging the federally operated Central Valley Project for harming the environment. And third, we're in court and state water board hearings pushing for protective and long overdue Bay Delta water quality control plans to ensure that enough fresh water stays in the rivers. And then there are brand new proposals to divert more water. Do you guys remember 2 years ago when Governor Newsom resurrected the idea to build a tunnel in the Delta? Well, last year, the fight against the Delta tunnel got bigger. This red line shows how the proposed tunnel aims to divert water out of the Sacramento River before it can get to the bay. It's now a $20 billion price tag for a tunnel that's 36 feet wide and 45 miles long. That would send trillions of gallons of the bay's water to Southern California and cities and industrial farms. While this is not the first tunnel to be proposed in California history, it is the first time the proposal is gaining political traction, and that's because the governor is falsely claiming that it's going to help with climate resilience. Unfortunately, our experts and the state's own experts know that that's not true. The tunnel will have devastating impacts on the communities and tribal groups who rely on the Delta for local water supplies, and it will harm fish and wildlife that are already struggling to survive. So with the help of our supporters, last year, Baykeeper and our partners sued the state to stop the Delta Tunnel. And while that case is still going on, we recently won a preliminary injunction to stop construction of the tunnel. So that's some good news for now. There's also the new Sites Dams project. This was a new proposal by the Newsom administration last year that's a series of diversions and dams in the Sacramento Valley. And the Trump administration recently announced that it's not going to block federal funding for the project. The infrastructure project would divert even more water from the Sacramento River. But as I mentioned, the river is already overtapped. Fish are going extinct, fisheries are collapsing, and the Delta tribes and communities are suffering. Less fresh water in the Delta is also leading to severe toxic algal blooms and higher water pollution concentrations. The Sites project would exacerbate all of those problems. That's why Baykeeper and our partners filed a legal opposition to the Sites project this past year. With your support, we've been at all of the hearings, which started last summer and are still happening. And we're urging the State Water Board to reject the Sites application and protect water quality, fisheries, and wildlife. This is some of the most critical water work in the West right now. There's enough water in our system for all of California's needs if the state just makes smarter science-based policy choices. So we're going to keep working to defend the watershed against bad state policies and new federal interference. I also want to quickly mention fish conditions in the Bay Delta, since this is a key indicator of the health of the bay. Both state and federal administrations are attacking the Endangered Species Act, and we're watching these attacks closely to see where we can block them. In the meantime, 2024 was the fourth year of recent salmon fishing closures due to low numbers. And no Delta smelt have been found in surveys over the last 6 years. Longfin smelt is a native fish that has declined 99% in the bay since the late 80s. But the good news here is that last year, Baykeeper sued to list the longfin smelt as a federal endangered species, and we won. In another fish update, San Francisco Bay is home to the only known population of white sturgeon in California, which have been around for about 46 million years. But excessive water diversions, overfishing, and the bay's 2 recent algal blooms have caused the population to decline by 80%. That's why, with the help of our supporters, we just sued the Trump administration in January to list the bay's white sturgeon as threatened under the Federal Endangered Species Act. These 2 new listings are going to result in more tools to block harmful projects like the Delta Tunnel and the Sites, dams, and other water diversions, because there's no way that the state and federal agencies can protect endangered fish with one hand and drain the rivers dry with the other. And that's our news on bay fish and flows. Now onto our fossil fuel updates. As many of you know, the fossil fuel industry is strong around the Bay Area. We have 5 active refineries, 2 of the West Coast's only coal export hubs, and a number of new fossil fuel projects being proposed. The new federal administration is making it a clear priority to expand the fossil fuel industry. It has declared a federal energy emergency, even though there's no actual emergency, because the United States is currently the largest oil and gas producer in the world. These orders pave the way for the industry to get massive subsidies, reduced regulation, and increased access to exploit public resources. But we have long partnered with community groups to block efforts to expand fossil fuel production and export throughout the Bay Area. And I'm happy to report that last year was no exception. Baykeeper continued to be an active thorn in the side of the fossil fuel industry. We've got a pending lawsuit against the federal government to better regulate refineries. Even though refineries could upgrade their technology to reduce pollution discharges to basically zero, Bay Area refineries are still allowed to keep their 1980s level technology and pollute our communities and our water. Our case was heard in federal court last fall, and we're waiting for a decision. And a decision to update refinery technology can't come soon enough because selenium levels are really high in the Bay's refinery corridor. This is causing spinal deformities in fish like the Sacramento splittail, which are pictured here. That's why in 2024, Baykeeper actively advocated for our local water agency to reduce selenium pollution from multiple refineries. Also last fall, we won our 300th legal victory. After our drones caught the Valero Oil Company polluting the bay 6 times with petroleum coke, Valero agreed to a timeline to clean up their Benicia operations and comply with the law. We also made them give $2.4 million back to the community to repair the damage that their pollution caused. This Valero win shows how local action can still be effective despite what's happening nationally. For the next 3 years, Valero has to follow our agreement and not pollute, no matter what's happening federally. We'll be watching and monitoring to make sure they comply, and there will be stiff penalties under our agreement if they don't. And we'll continue to work with community groups to watchdog all 5 Bay Area oil refineries to make it harder for them to profit off pollution in our neighborhoods. And that brings me to the next set of updates related to coal pollution. First, we continued to keep an eye on the Richmond coal terminal to ensure it was complying with our legal agreement to stop pollution from the site. Also, we feel even better about our win with local partners in Richmond to secure a ban on coal storage and handling in the city. That means regardless of what happens at the federal level, there will be no more dirty coal allowed in Richmond after 2026. And as we've done for the last decade, we continue to advocate to block a new coal export terminal in Oakland. So far, with our community partners, we've successfully kept 9 million tons of coal from Utah mines out of Oakland. And finally, in coal updates, our petition with national partners to force the federal government to better regulate coal trains is still pending. Across the United States, trains transport nearly 1 billion tons of coal annually. Coal dust blows off the trains and into nearby waters. It also gets into neighborhoods where it can cause severe health problems. The Clean Water Act gives EPA the authority to control this pollution, but the agency under past administrations has failed to do so. Now, given the current transitions at EPA, it looks like we might actually have to wait for a better time to push that petition forward. In fact, with the current administration's efforts to dismantle EPA and other federal agencies and defund state support, we're likely to see a rolling back of environmental protections across all industries. That's why Baykeeper is working to strengthen state and local protections and take legal action to enforce existing laws. Our strategy includes expanding our enforcement to cutting-edge litigation against the primary sources of pollution. And that includes tackling the problem of industrial plastic pollution at the source, the producer of the plastic polymers. So that brings us back to the oil industry. Baykeeper and our partners at Sierra Club, Surfrider, and Heal the Bay in LA are suing the Exxon Oil Company. Our lawsuit alleges that Exxon creates many of the polymers used in single-use plastics. And these plastics can end up polluting the Bay and California's cities and shorelines. This case is currently pending in federal court in California. And it looks like our lawsuit may have hit a nerve. In response to our litigation, Exxon just sued Baykeeper and our partners back in Texas federal court for defamation and business interference. So now, one of the biggest companies in the world is using expensive litigation to try to silence us and our partners. These kinds of slap suits are intended to scare groups from telling the truth and holding big companies accountable. But holding big corporations accountable for the harm they're causing the Bay is core to our mission. So thanks to generous supporters like you, we are not going to back down. I also want to take this moment to spotlight another oil industry tactic, greenwashing. There's a carbon capture pipeline project being proposed for the North Bay wetlands right now. I put that in air quotes because it should actually be called carbon waste dumping. I'm curious, if you've heard of this project before, can you put a 1 in the chat? The orange line here represents their plan to build the pipeline across private parcels of land and also under 45 miles of the bay. And to no one's surprise, it crosses through communities that are already overburdened by pollution. A closer look reveals that the oil industry is just using the pipeline technology to prolong the lifespan of the refineries in the Bay Area. The technology is expensive, highly energy intensive, leads to increased emissions, and it can cause dangerous leaks that injure people and wildlife. That's why Baykeeper is partnering with allies to put up roadblocks and raise awareness in the communities where the pipeline is being proposed. Okay, that's it for our fossil fuel updates for now. Now, last but definitely not least, we'll talk about the climate change impacts. One of the other threats we're seeing from the new administration is climate change denial. And that's showing up in this first 100 days as erasing climate-related data, getting rid of agencies and programs that help monitor and track our weather patterns, and clawing back climate and clean energy funds. The real news is that climate patterns are actually worsening. Over the past few years, we've seen more intense storms and flooding that are resulting in larger pollution impacts and infrastructure damage in our communities and around the Bay. With larger storms, that means more sewage discharges with bacteria every time it rains, and our sewer systems get overwhelmed. That's why last year, Baykeeper expanded our Sick of Sewage campaign. We're now focusing on San Francisco, one of the biggest sources of sewage spills to the Bay. They dump an average of 2 billion gallons of untreated stormwater and sewage into the Bay every year. And as those Bay swimmers out there know, it forces the San Francisco Health Department to close shoreline beaches for multiple days after it rains because it's not safe. That's why Baykeeper, EPA, and the state sued the city last year for these Clean Water Act violations on the Bay side. And you may have seen the headlines yesterday that the Supreme Court just sided with San Francisco on its appeal of the Oceanside permit against EPA. This is actually a different case from ours. The new ruling doesn't have much of an impact on our case. However, it does undermine EPA's authority to regulate some types of discharges. And unfortunately, it plays right into the hands of the Trump administration to weaken EPA. But even under this new SCOTUS decision, San Francisco is still going to need to comply with the Clean Water Act. And the new ruling just made it harder for EPA to tell them how to do that. In addition to increasing sewage pollution in the bay, these larger storms can also increase pollution that causes algal blooms, like the ones we saw back in 2022 and 2023. In some good news, last summer, Baykeeper helped adopt the Bay Area's first permit to regulate pollution that causes these algal blooms. So as the permit is implemented and our wastewater systems are upgraded, even if there are bigger storms, these systems will be able to handle the increased flows and keep these pollutants from getting into the bay and hopefully prevent future blooms from happening again. Also in fun news this past year, Baykeeper started the Bay's first community science monitoring program for trained volunteers to investigate harmful algae in the bay so we can detect a harmful bloom before it happens. We'll continue this monitoring program this year, and we hope to learn how to prevent these blooms from spreading too widely in the future. And finally, an update on toxic shoreline sites and sea level rise. Estimates predict a 1-foot rise in sea levels by 2050 and a 3-foot rise by 2100. Let me know in the chat, do these dates sound really far away? And do those numbers feel really abstract? They definitely do for me. So let me put it this way. We're already seeing flooding around the bay. And that's because groundwater is already rising. Since much of the Bay Area's shoreline is built on fill, scientists are realizing that sinking shorelines are also making flooding worse. That's why Baykeeper is working closely with the Shoreline Contamination Coalition. That's a group of 18 environmental and environmental justice organizations around the Bay Area to prioritize the cleanup of toxic shoreline sites. In the past year, this coalition worked with the Bayview Hunters Point community in San Francisco, the Richmond community at the AstraZeneca and Hackathorn sites, and the Crockett community near the Selby Slag site to get those areas cleaned up properly before sea levels, groundwater, and floodwaters displace the toxic chemicals and spread them throughout the area. Baykeeper also worked with city councils in Alameda and Newark to help them adopt stronger shoreline development plans and prevent the building of unsafe housing on toxic sites. And we advocated for agencies in Pittsburgh, Alameda, Marin, and San Francisco to better clean up sites before they flood and spread toxic contamination throughout the bay. The federal administration's denial of climate change isn't going to help the Bay Area when our streets, homes, and businesses are being flooded. So that's why we're focused locally to proactively address the problem. And that's our update on climate impacts in the Bay Area. I hope you see that your support is helping Baykeeper tackle some of the biggest threats to the Bay and keeping all of us safe. The Bay is one of the most urban estuaries in the world, and that means there are pollution sources and threats all around the Bay Area. That's why Baykeeper exists. We were founded by a scientist on a boat named Mike Hers with the belief that pollution needs to be investigated and corporations and government agencies need to be held responsible for the harm they're causing the Bay. Because we believe everyone around the Bay Area has a fundamental right to clean water and a safe environment. That's why our pollution patrol actively investigates and deters polluters. And we use a unique combination of tools that I like to call our triple threat of investigation, advocacy, and litigation. Our lawyers, scientists, and investigators are passionate about defending the Bay. It might take years and get complicated, but we figure out how to fix the problems using our core expertise. And the fun part is, because we're science and legal based, we have facts and laws on our side, and we win a lot. We have over 306 legal victories to stop polluters and government agencies. We've spent over 17,000 hours on patrol investigating pollution and deterring polluters. And my personal favorite stat is that we don't take money from the penalties awarded in our cases. We grant those funds to local nonprofits doing good work for the Bay, and that's resulted in more than $15 million so far to restore the Bay, activate youth, and educate future Bay stewards. And we do all of this with a small but mighty team. We have 16 incredible staff, including legal and science experts, along with some amazing event staff who are helping run this webinar tonight. 32 members of our board of directors and advisory board, lots of skippers and skilled volunteers, and we have core partnerships with other nonprofits and community organizations to amplify our reach and make a bigger impact. And of course, we couldn't do any of this work or achieve any of these wins without our dedicated supporters. So thank you. We defend San Francisco Bay because you deserve to live in a healthy Bay Area. And finally, you might be wondering, I'm feeling so inspired. How can I support these fantastic efforts? I'm glad you asked. There are 3 ways to get involved and defend the Bay, Baykeeper style. First, you can help us keep an eye out for water pollution and report it when you see it. Second, you can take actions with us to defend the Bay. Here are a few specific things you can do to challenge bad government decisions and corporate polluters. These are just some suggestions based on some of the issues that we talked about tonight. And if you go to this QR code or the link in the chat, you'll be taken straight to the webpage where you can see these petitions and take action on some of them right now. 2 notes. First, signing actions is actually helpful. We can testify in a hearing and say we represent 5,000 Bay Area residents. Or we can say we represent 50,000 Bay Area residents who care about this issue, and they're watching you to see if you do the right thing. It's pretty powerful. And second, some of these petitions are in the works, so keep an eye out for our monthly emails for more opportunities to take local action. And finally, you can make a gift today. If you're not a Baykeeper member already, or even if you are, I'd love to encourage you all to donate tonight. We stay independent by not accepting money from polluters. And thank goodness, we also stay stable by not accepting government grants. And this is possible because of generous supporters like you. A big thanks to those of you who are already giving and are monthly donors. For those of you who aren't members yet, I'll let you in on a little secret. While a lot of folks out there lie awake at night feeling gloomy about the climate and state of the world, Baykeeper supporters rest a little easier. They know that they're the backbone behind an effective organization making a difference around the Bay, and you can join them and feel better too. And remember, the more members we have, the more clout we have to defend you and the Bay. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks so much for your time. I hope you got to learn about how we're making a difference, and I hope you're inspired to stand by our side as we tackle the biggest threats facing the Bay in the coming year.